So here's Jim Browning, interviewed by AARP's Doug Shadel.
Well, why don't we start at the beginning, which is just tell us, how did you get started doing what you're doing?
Well, I've got to say the YouTube stuff was entirely accidental. The first video I put on YouTube was a recording of a scammer who'd called me. And probably quite naively, I thought, if I give this video to the internet service provider, the people who provided his broadband, they might throw him off the network. And that's really where it started. The file would have been too big to email. So I thought, well, I'll throw it onto YouTube. And if I put a link to YouTube in my email, then maybe this internet service provider will do something. But as it turned out, the internet service provider did nothing at all. I was naive in thinking that they would. And it actually gathered a lot of views, as much to my surprise, because obviously a lot of people get scammed. And the advice is normally hang up the phone, don't do anything, don't engage. Whereas I had completely engaged. And I had a very clean recording of what the scammer was doing. So that's where it all started.
Well, how did people see that video? They just stumbled onto it. You weren't advertising it or anything, right?
Oh, not at all. No. And I don't know what it was. I mean, I guess the first couple of videos that I put on, they would have got very few views anyway. But there was one that I put on about locating the scammers, which suddenly took off, and I couldn't quite work out why. And then I realized that there are very few people. They may suspect that maybe the call has come from overseas, maybe Asia somewhere, but there's very few people who've been able to track down exactly where the scammers come from. So that gathered an awful lot of interest. And it probably, for me anyway, was probably the start of, well, maybe if I dig a little bit deeper into these scams and put them onto YouTube and give other people an idea about what you would have to do to find out who the scammers are. That was really kind of the start of what made me do what I'm doing at the moment, which is kind of dig that much deeper into scams, because the whole subject of scams I find fascinating, and I think from what I can gather from YouTube, a lot of other people find it fascinating as well. Plus, everybody gets these phone calls, and although the advice is obviously hang up, there's curiosity as well. I mean, what happens if you engage with these guys? What are they really after? Why are they asking all these questions? So I think a lot of people are just genuinely interested in the subject, full stop. And maybe the way I present it in the way that I do might just kind of pique people's interest. And, I've had my odd exploits with scammers as well. And I've engaged other types of media. I've had the BBC and so on involved. And I think over time, it has certainly grown. And now I'm well over 3 million people on YouTube. I know, incredibly.
So you started this, what you just described, how long ago was that? The very first time you posted that first YouTube?
Yeah, first video would have been about 2014. So 7 years? And at the very start, I did very little. I maybe put 1 or 2 videos a year up there, again, just to kind of report what was going on with scammers. But it wasn't until really about the last maybe 3 or 4 years that I've started either to get more views and to put more videos onto YouTube. So yes, it's grown quite a lot. And let's say in the last few years, I've dug just that much deeper. And I think since I've done that, really the audience has continued to grow. At first it was purely, this is what's going on my PC and not much more than that. But these days, I've got to the extent where I can sometimes find exactly where the people are, sometimes see their faces for their own webcams. And even one time, I got access to the CCTV, so the television around the offices where these scammers were working. And I could see and hear exactly what they were doing. They were scamming other people, and I could see and hear that. So yeah, that was quite a popular one.
Yeah. So what do you think? Could you describe in layman's terms kind of how you're able to, you don't have to go through the technical aspect of here's mechanically exactly what I do, but what you're doing is showing people the inside of these scammers' computers, and we're watching crimes as they're being committed, Indeed. Which is just enormously fascinating, obviously, for people. But can you just describe in layman's terms how you go about doing that?
Yeah, well, the long and short of it is The scammers that I go after are the people that want remote access to my computer. And although they'll not say that, they'll usually say, we're going to connect you to a secure server, some woolly words. They want to be able to control my computer. They want to be able to see what's on my screen, use my mouse even, and even blacken out my screen, because that allows them to get access to my online bank account. In fact, they will encourage me. They will usually come up with some story like they're giving me a refund or they're whatever it is. They'll encourage me to log into my online bank account. And when you do that and they have remote access, that's when they can start transferring money out. But to answer the question about how I get access to their computer, obviously there's a two-way connection. So they have to connect from their computer to my computer. And there is a channel of communication built up there. And if you know what you're doing, it is possible to use that in the reverse direction. So instead of using the scammer has remote access to my computer, there is a way that I can get remote access to theirs without them knowing, which is the key bit. And it can be as simple as the normal way that the scammer gets access to your computer is he'll ask you to download some software. And on that software, there'll be a username and a password, or it's usually like a user ID and some sort of PIN number or password. And the scammer will ask you to call that out. Now, if you act a little bit dumb and say, well, what am I looking at? I mean, what's your password? They can sometimes read out what their password is. And if they do that, then whenever they connect to your computer, you can see their ID. And that combined with their password gives you access. So that's one kind of simple way to do that. Sometimes they'll even ask you to set a password on your computer that they can use. And a large percentage of time, they will have set up the same password at their side. So simply, if you can get their ID, you'll know what their password is, you can get access to your computer. There's other ways as well, but those are the simplest.
You know, there was a tape that you just sent us that was, I don't know if it was the Bessie tape or if it was the more recent one, where they were having trouble logging into their account. And the guy goes, oh, well, I'll help you with that. And he helps them reset their password and tells them what the new password is. But then you said to me, they were lying. They were saying it was America 2020, when really what they were doing was resetting the victim's bank password to one that only they know, so they'll be able to go into their bank account. Is that a standard thing that you've seen?
They're very helpful when it comes to people without online bank accounts. And they will go out of their way to, if you haven't already got an online bank account, they will assist you in setting that up. And they will ask you for a load of personal details, your social security number, your name, age, address, all of your credit card, exactly what you need to set up an online bank account. And chances are, if you're over the age of 70, a lot of people don't already have online bank accounts. And even if you don't, they will be extremely helpful in setting that up for you. But of course, it's to do exactly what you've said. They will want to control that bank account, and they will helpfully set the password. Sometimes, as you say, they will say, look, I'm typing in America 123 or whatever it's going to be. They will lie about that. They will set a different password. I can typically see it because I've got a keylogger running, and I will see what they've actually typed. But of course, they'll say something different to the victim. So they're all very sneaky about that. And it isn't just bank accounts. They will pretend to be somebody like Amazon, and they will do something sneaky, which is whether it's a robocall or whether sometimes if you search the internet looking for say an Amazon support number, they will pretend to be Amazon. If you happen to hit the wrong phone number, they will say, answer the phone as, yes, we're Amazon support. And the first thing they'll do is say, okay, what's your username? Okay, and they'll kind of check something. And the next thing they'll say is, right, I'm going to send you a PIN to your telephone, to your cell phone. And what they're doing at that point is resetting your password online. And by you reading out the PIN to them, it's them going through that password reset process and them gaining access to your Amazon or whatever account. So it's incredibly sneaky what they'll do. And if you're not aware that you're not speaking to the likes of Amazon or whoever they're claimed to be, you could be completely oblivious to the fact that someone has just gained access to whatever bank account they or whatever web service they pretend to be. So very sneaky, yeah.
Can I ask you a follow-up to that? And you guys stop me if we get too much in the weeds, because we do this all the time, Jim and I. And I'm like, oh my God, that reminds me of one other thing. But go back to it never occurred to me that, because I haven't seen one of these, if the person doesn't have a bank account, they'll help set them up.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll lie about the password, but they'll now have the login and the password to the newly set up access. Does that mean that even if you stop the current transaction, get the remote access software off of the person's computer, that scammer can still independently access their bank account?
Yes.
With that password and login?
Oh, they can, yeah. And unless you know to go in and reset that password yourself, then they will continue to have that access. So I guess the advice would be, even if you suspect that you have at some point someone has stolen money or convinced you to transfer money, I would say immediately update that reset that password anyway. Now, in some cases, they don't have that access. Sometimes they will, particularly if you've already got an online bank account. Typically then the scammers don't need to know your password. All they really need you to do is to actually just log in whilst they have remote access. But even so, if you've been compromised in any way, reset the password regardless. It's a safe thing to do.
Can we talk about for a minute? Talk us through that, as how you got to see that, and any comments you want to make about the course of that particular tape.
So we'll maybe talk about both. Yeah, I'll start with she already had an online bank account. So logging into an online bank account was fairly straightforward for this group of scammers. She had her username and password stored in the browser, like most people do, because it's convenient. But of course, the scammers took advantage of that. They called her up pretending to be, I think it was Amazon, I can't really remember now. And they promised her a refund of some kind. Now, that's the usual premise behind a lot of the calls that I hear these days. They pretend to be eBay, they pretend to be your bank. There's some transaction there. They'll say that, oh, was that not due? Okay, then we're going to refund you. And that is just a prelude to them asking to type some stuff in on the command line, which give them remote access. So they could then see what was going on her computer and indeed then take control of her computer. And the first thing they usually ask you to do is to log on to their online bank account to see if this refund has been received. And of course, initially, Betsy didn't see anything at all. Her bank account was completely intact. And in fact, she was saying, oh, no, I don't see any refund. And then suddenly Betsy's screen went black. And what happens is the remote access software that the scammers have installed has that function. And it allows them to see her screen, but her screen to remain black. So that's the technique that they use to do the next part of the scam, which is to manipulate her bank accounts. Now, it so happened that Betsy had some savings as well as a checking account. And what they usually do in that case is to move her savings into her checking account. And if you just look at your checking account, you will see that money has been added. They were very clear about trying to get Betsy to get a pen and paper to write down her current balance before her screen goes black and stress, look, you need to remember that total because, hey, it's going to change whenever we refund you. And they'll promise her some lowish value, say $200 of a refund. And suddenly, when her screen gets unblackened, instead of $200, she will eventually see something like $20,000. And what she doesn't know is the $20,000 is her own savings. It hasn't come from the scammers, but it is, that's the second part of the scam. But they will then do a little song and dance about how they're going to give her the refund. So before she gets to see how much has gone into her bank account, they will then run a little script on her computer. And it doesn't do anything. It just says something it says something like, "Welcome to Chase Online Refund Server." And this is a little script which does nothing at all. But they will ask her to carefully enter her name, and they will stress, look, you must type this exactly right, or goodness knows what will happen. Then they'll say, type in the last 4 digits of your social security number. She will type in those 4 digits. And then they'll say, enter your zip code. She will carefully enter her zip code. And the last part is, enter your refund amount. And they'll tell her, I want you to carefully type 200. And the scammers will then, because they've got access to her computer and her keyboard, they will type an extra 2 zeros. So Betsy will type 200. The scammer will add a couple of extra zeros. And then they will say, oh, hang on, you're meant to type 200. You've actually typed 20,000. And they will go from there, because then all of a sudden, Betsy thinks that she's done something wrong. The scammers will do a real song and dance about that. They will say, oh my God, my job is in jeopardy. How am I going to feed my children? I'm going to have to get this money back. And they'll reveal then her bank account, which really does show an extra 20,000 in there. But of course, if she looked at her savings, they would see that, or she would see that 20,000 has been removed from it. So if Betsy believes that she's done something wrong, and she can see 20,000 extra in her normal checking account, she will then be put in a position where she feels obliged to return that money. And that's really when the scammers kind of do their acting role, and they will try to force her to return that money as quickly as possible. Really turning on the acting for this. Can't feed my wife and kids. My job is at risk. And of course, all this time, Betsy is completely oblivious to the fact that it's her savings there, and she's just about to send him her savings. So although it's complex enough, and they use several kind of technical techniques like blacking out her screen, it really is a pure manipulation. It is, while the screen is black, it's really like a magician smoke and mirrors. If you have a look closely, you can see what's going on, but they won't let Betsy have a close look at this. And the remote access software allows them to prevent her from typing anything or move her mouse. So they will give her a fixed look at her one account, and she will not be able to see, for example, her savings. And they deliberately keep it that way. So yes, that's really the essence of the scam. And by the end of all of this, Betsy really is in a position where she feels she is obliged to return money somehow. And they usually ask for it in one of 3 ways. The normal one is a wire transfer, particularly if it's a high amount, like over $20,000. And they will typically not send it directly to themselves. That would be too obvious. They will typically pick another country. So if the scammer's in India, quite often they will ask the victim to send money to Thailand, and they will have a money mule in Thailand who will keep a percentage of that money and then wire transfer it on to the actual scammer. That's one way. They will often ask for the victim to go and get gift cards to the value of how much they've said they've refunded. Or sometimes, and this is where quite recently I've worked with another guy in the US, but they will ask the victims to put literally cash into a box, into a FedEx box, and post it through the mail to another address, usually in the US. And those are the three ways they typically use.
How did you decide how do you decide when to intervene? In that case, you jumped in there just before they were going to use the Chase. I forget the name of the payments thing they were going to use. Zelle. They were going to use Zelle.
That's right. Yeah.
And I don't expect you to remember this. You do a lot of these, but I've been staring at this. So, they put in $997, emergency medical reason. And you saw that. It seems like when they got to that part, you started frantically calling her, and you called her 5 times, no answer. And on the 6th time, she finally picks up and you convinced her to hang up. And I guess one question I have is, how do you decide, why did you wait that long? If you could call her at the beginning and you knew she was about to be scammed, is there some strategic reason for that? Or was it just you were trying to reach her all along and you didn't find her number or something?
I'm almost sure in this case, I didn't have her phone number. All I had was what you see at the start of the video, which is her name, date of birth, and an address, a physical address. So I didn't have her phone number. So what I was doing whilst that scam was running through a lot of online resources where if you get the right name and address, you may be able to pick up the phone number. So I was frantically hunting for that phone number the whole time. In fact, that's why you and I sometimes, Doug, have had the conversation about, look, I can see a name of someone and I might know their state or whatever. Do you have anybody on your books that you might be able to, if I get desperate sometimes because if I don't have their phone number, there isn't any immediate way of getting in touch with that. I mean, if I'd sent say an email, she may have picked it up the following week or something, So unless I have a phone number, I am stuck. And it's fine if the scammers capture that, but they didn't in her case. So literally, I was frantically searching for her phone number. I eventually, I think, obviously must have found it somewhere. And I'm pretty sure I heard, because I could hear her voice, and I think whenever I was making those calls, I think I could hear her voice on the answer phone. So I was basically pretty sure I had the right phone number. So yeah, I just keep on until I eventually get an answer.
What was going through your mind when you were calling her and she wasn't picking up?
It's frustrating, and I've had this as well because the scammers, don't forget, are on the phone to her at the same time. And unless somehow I can kick the scammers off the phone, it's sometimes possible because sometimes they actually use their computers to make the phone calls. You don't have to have a proper phone line, but sometimes, and I think if I remember this group, we're using software on their computer. So I may have, I can't remember in her case, but I may have frozen their voice call because it was on their computer. I have access to their computer. I can basically stop these sort of processes. And I think then I was able to get in touch with her. But say the delay was more getting the phone number than actually making the call. Although she didn't initially answer, but she's on the phone to the scammer. Why would she?
So once you get her on the phone, just talk about the challenge of just sort of describing who you are when you're doing these interventions, because you do them all the time, right?
Yeah.
Do you use a fake name? Who do you say you are? Do you explain that you're Jim Browning and you snuck into her computer? What do you tell them?
It kind of depends. Quite often I will say that I'm a representative of the bank that, if Betsy was, I think, Bank of America, if I was calling, I would quite often say I'm whatever, I'd make up some name and I'm in the online fraud division of Bank of America. That's quite often the way I'll start, because if I said anything else, like my name is Jim Browning and I've hacked into some scammer's computer, I think I would hang up on me if I said that, So whereas if I say, look, I represent Bank of America, although I'm lying, I'm just far more likely to be believed. And I will usually start the conversation along the lines of, we've seen some very suspicious activity on your computer. Is someone on the phone with you who's trying to get you to do like a refund or is giving you a refund? So I'll convince them that, number one, there might be a scam going on, might be fraud. that will usually cause the victim to think twice about what's going on. And usually the victim will hang up. If they're on the phone to the scammer, they usually hang up the other call. But sometimes that doesn't work. And I do struggle sometimes, particularly with people who have been coached to what to say. And the scammers will genuinely build up a rapport with their victims. They will come across as extremely friendly. They're trying to help this person out of a pickle because, they've got all this extra money in their bank account. And then all of a sudden there's somebody coming and interrupting this whole phone conversation. And they're trying, don't forget, to fix something else which is extremely urgent in their mind. So it really is, it's quite a difficult time. And I don't always succeed, that's the thing. Most people will listen, but I do get a certain percentage of people who say, you're lying, or you must be the scammer. And I've even had one woman, I actually contacted her well after the event that she had been scammed. I picked up a file on the scammer's computer, and it was a copy of a wire transfer where she'd wired, I think it was $35,000 to Thailand. And I called her to say, look, I've picked this up on a scammer's computer, and you need to go in. Are you aware it was a scam? And she actually said to me, look, that was a genuine transfer and it's none of your business. And then I said to her, look, the way that they run these scams is they move your savings to your checking account. And unless you have checked your savings, you may not be aware that they've actually transferred money. And only then, this was months after the scam, only then did she figure out that she'd been scammed. And, the initial thing was none of your business. It was a genuine transaction, and, why are you even calling me? So, yeah, it can be difficult. Plus, there will be people who are genuinely not always fully aware of what's going on and may even have dementia. And unfortunately, scammers love to get that sort of group of people. And if you have dementia, chances are you will have been scammed more than once. You will work your way onto scammers' call lists, and they will continually call you. And unfortunately, some of the people I've talked to, it can be quite apparent very early on that they really have been scammed, and the only people who can really help them are probably friends or relatives. So I've met all sorts.
When you say you've met all sorts, what percentage of the people you observed in this way are older versus younger people?
So out of the people who get contacted by scammers, I would say the vast majority, certainly more than 90% in my mind, would be over the age of 70. But that's not to say that younger people can't be scammed. And I've definitely come across people in their teens who have been scammed. And I was even, you don't have to be particularly gullible. They can just, you can be caught at just the wrong time. If you've just made an Amazon order and then all of a sudden someone claiming to be Amazon calls you, then you're much more susceptible to that. And you're more likely to, just because of coincidence, go along with what they're saying. So, although the majority, I would say, would be older, it's certainly right across the board. You could be 15 to 95, I think I said before.
We've been focused on the refund scam, but the other big iteration of this is you've got a virus on your computer. Could you just give us a sort of a short description of that approach? And then I'm going to ask you what people can do to avoid these things.
So there's a few different types of scams involving computers. And one of the big ones that the scammers rely on is something that looks like a virus on your computer. And what you would see on your screen would be a huge warning message, usually with very loud audio. And the audio would say, your computer has been infected. Please call the following phone number immediately. And emblazoned on your screen will be a phone number with what looks like a lot of virus checks around it. And if you come across one of these things and you've never seen it before, it will be extremely alarming because it will lock up your mouse. You can't touch the keyboard. If you try to browse elsewhere, the same thing will come back again, and this sound will be blaring at you. And unless you know exactly what to do, you effectively are almost railroaded into calling that number, because you will not be able to get your computer back unless you know exactly what you're doing. And a lot of people fall for this purely because they want to get rid of this message. They'll call the number and they'll be unaware that the person on the end of the phone, their job is to get money out of you. And it's not to fix any sort of problem, because there isn't a problem. It is purely that that message is designed to lock up your computer and force the phone call. And if you ever come across any of those messages, unless you kind of know a little bit about computers, it can be very difficult to get rid of that message. But the very simplest bit of advice is to simply hold the power switch on your computer for 5 seconds, and that will turn it off. And when you turn it back on again, that message will be gone, and you can be rest assured that there never was a problem. You can easily recognize a fake virus message by the fact that there will be a phone number on it. If you see a phone number, you can guarantee that that's a fake message. So to get rid of it, hold down the power button. There is a more technical way of getting rid of it, which is to kill your browser. But you have to know to press 3 keys, Control, Alt, and Del, run Task Manager, look for your browser and kill it. But the simplest way is to say, hold the power switch for 5 seconds, start up your computer again, and it'll be back to normal.
Now, you mentioned that if you see a phone number, that guarantees it's a fake message. Does that mean that, because one of the places I got confused about the prevention message here is, if you have antivirus software on your computer, sometimes a pop-up will legitimately come onto your screen, right? But you're saying that won't have a message to call anybody. It'll just be telling you what to do.
That's right.
You talk a little bit about that. Like, there are legitimate pop-up messages that are antivirus software on your computer. And how do you tell the difference between those two?
Yeah, so genuine antiviruses, they do their job by cleaning up the virus, and they might put up a little pop-up window to say, hey, I've just encountered this problem. This is what I've done about it. But the one thing it won't have is a phone number on it. If your antivirus is doing its job, sometimes you won't even see the pop-up. It will just clean it in the background without any knowledge. If it puts up a pop-up, that's a good thing, because you should be aware that it's doing something, it's cleaning something up. But the important thing is it leaves it at that. It will clean up the virus. Sometimes it will ask you a question like, do you really want to clean this, or do you want to keep it, or whatever. But very rarely will you ever want to keep something that an antivirus program detects. 99% plus of the times an antivirus kicks in, gives you a little message, you should just say, yes, that looks okay. It's just cleaned something. But it will never, and I repeat, never put a phone number for you to call to say your computer now has a real problem. You need to phone a number. No antivirus program works like that. And if you ever see it, that is going to be a scam. If you call that number, the person on the end of the phone will go through a very set script, will sound extremely convincing, and will get you to run all these things and show you stuff that really makes it look as if there's a problem on your computer, but it's all designed to let you think that they're going to do some work and you need to pay them to do that work. And for some reason, your genuine antivirus isn't running properly. Whereas the reality is it's a glorified advert. There was nothing wrong with your computer. And if you get messages, and it's usually about 2 or 3 things. If you ever watch my YouTube videos, they run through a very set script because it sounds convincing. And again, if you've never seen anything like that before, these people, don't forget, their day job is to sound convincing enough to get money out of you. So they're going to say everything they possibly can to make sure that they get money out of you. And they'll test the waters as well. They will initially throw in well, that'll cost you $1,200. And if you start to say, like, I couldn't possibly afford that, then they'll ask you things like, well, sir, are you over 60 because we've got a reduction for retired people? And then they'll bring down the cost in a way that they'll kind of get feedback from the victim to say, well, maybe I could just about afford that. So they will get as much money as possible out of you. They might start high and work their way down a little bit, but their aim is to get as much as they can. They get bonused on all of this. It's not even commission. They will get, in rupees typically, a certain amount for every sale that they make. And if they make over a certain amount per week or per month, it's like any other sales job, they'll get a big bonus for that. So they will get as much money as they possibly can from you.
What if somebody gets one of these virus messages, you've got a virus, what should they, well, you've told us that you should turn the power off and then reboot it. But what if you're continue to be concerned anyway about, something's running slow or there's something weird about my computer? What should they do and what should they not do?
Yeah, so if you've seen any of the messages and you're still concerned about it, still the best advice would be just to run a normal virus scan anyway. It doesn't do any harm. Typically, every computer these days has got some sort of antivirus already built in. If you have Windows 10, there's something called Windows Defender already there. And you can guarantee that there's some protection. Only older operating systems like maybe Windows 7 may not have this built in. But by and large, everybody has got this. They've either got a free version, which are just as good typically as paid for versions. But if you still are concerned, my advice would be maybe just ask a friend or relative if they can have a look at your computer, somebody you know and trust anyway. Certainly do not trust anyone who's behind a phone number that you see on screen. They are professional liars and they're just trying to get money out of you. So if you still have concerns, honestly, just go to someone that you might know who's okay with computers. They might run maybe an additional virus scan. But as I say, if you've seen something with a phone number on it, I could guarantee that that is not genuine and there probably was never a fault or a problem on your computer in the first place.
Okay, I have two more questions. One is technical and the other is philosophical for you. One is technical in that I notice this whole business of manipulating the way the screen looks. You said that a common tactic is to transfer money out of savings into checking. Why do they bother to transfer money when they could just go into the HTML code and just add $20,000 to the checking account without doing any transferring?
You're asking about why they manipulate what is on your bank account screen. And yes, their trick is normally when you're either distracted or your screen is black, they can go in and edit the page and they can add money. And as you say, they don't necessarily need to take that from savings and add it to the checking account. They could just go in directly and add $10,000, $20,000 directly to your checking account. And some of them do that. So that is a genuine tactic. And if you already have a fairly large amount of money in your checking account, they will almost double that because they know that if you withdraw half of that amount of money, you genuinely have that in your account and that's what they can get away with. But the reason why they don't tend to do that, or they would prefer to move savings into your checking account, is that they will quite often tell the victims to go to their bank. And the reason why they say that is if you go into your bank with ID and with a good reason, you can take out all of that money directly. And obviously, if there genuinely is money and they will ask the bank teller, is there that money in my account? Then the bank teller will say, yes, there is 10,000 added to your account yesterday. And the victim will be then, well, okay, it was genuine then. It wasn't seeing things. It isn't some sort of scam or trick. There really is money in my account. But what they don't know is actually that has been moved from the savings. So there is an advantage to a scammer in that if you go to your bank and ask questions, usually, unless the bank are really on the ball, they will give you the answer that the scammer expects the bank teller to give, which is, yes, the money's there.
Even when someone resists, they can still get through to you, it seems like.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, it depends who the scammers are and what the techniques that they typically use. Some scammers will resort to persuasion and trying to be nice to the person on the end of the phone to say, my job's at risk, you need to return this money to me quickly, and they'll be persuasive. But if the victim isn't playing ball and wants to check and wants to ask questions, which is always a good thing, or wants to involve other people, because usually the scammers will be telling the victims, you can't tell anybody in the bank about this, and they'll usually have some good excuse for that. But in the case of Karen that we saw, she was definitely one of those people who wasn't going to be scammed. And what the scammers did in her case was to say, well, hold on, I'm going to black your screen again. And when they unblackened her screen, what it looked like to her was that all of her balances had gone to zero. All of her savings looked like they were gone. All of her checking information was set to zero. And they then come up with the statement of, well, unless you comply, unless you do what we want you to do, we are holding your money, and you are going to get none of that back unless you give us what we've just asked for, which is 10,000, 20,000, whatever they just agreed. And that way, you know, she was liable in her mind anyway to lose a lot more money unless she complied. But that's exactly what they want. And I guess over time, they've come up with that technique as a way of forcing their victims to do what they want them to do. And that has certainly been the case for the last 2 or 3 years that I have seen, that forcing the victim to comply via this zeroing technique, it has certainly come more and more to the fore. And I think from what I've read and what I've heard other scammers saying is that technique seems to be more successful than just persuasion. So that way they can force things, and not only force things, they will get people to, in her case, this was right before a bank holiday, and you know, she only had maybe 1.5 hours before the bank closed, and they were using that technique to get her to go there and then to the bank and make sure that she did what she was told to do. So yes, you can see all the psychology, and unfortunately that worked with her. She was prepared to go to the bank then, you know, instead of the following Tuesday or whatever it was going to be. And it worked with her. So, you know, it's a tried and trusted technique now for scammers.
The thing that's amazing about it is they knew they were being scammed.
Yeah.
They knew they were not being fooled, but they couldn't figure a way out of it. They figured, oh, they've got me, right? So even the smart people who figure it out and say, oh my God, I'm being scammed, still think they're just sort of out of moves except to comply.
Correct. I mean, that's what the scammers do. They manipulate the victims in every way. Every trick that they can play, they will do that in order to get money. And in the case of Joe, he felt he had no choice because as far as he was concerned, his bank balance was now zero. That's all of his life savings were suddenly zero. And the scammer had convinced him that the only way he was going to get his money back was for him to go and buy gift cards and return, you know, $1,000, $2,000 in gift cards, and then and only then would he get his life savings back. And it's incredibly manipulative, but it's also incredibly effective. He thought he genuinely had no choice in this. He knew he was being scammed. He went in and he told the guy at the desk he knew he was being scammed, and he could see no way out of it. That's right. And unless he went and bought the cards, he felt that was his only way out. He was very lucky though, because he had literally got to the point where he was at the cash desk, had bought the cards, and I just about got through to him at that point to say, stop what you're doing, you do have another choice.
So, Jim, I asked you this before, just in the way of closing my line of questioning, and thank you for this. This has been super good. You're always so good at this. But what's the future of Jim Browning in this work? Obviously, it's gone. What we talked about in the article was you sort of went from intellectual curiosity, I'm a problem solver, to now it's a little bit of a cause. Do you plan to, you want to just talk a little bit about that? How does it make you feel when you can stop this? Do you plan to keep doing it?
If you're asking about the future of what I'm going to do, I quite enjoy what I'm doing. There's no two ways about that. I like getting one over on scammers. That's, I've learned that in the last while. It's not just about making people aware of scams. That's obviously huge, and it is having an effect. And I do get emails from people saying, look, I caught my mother or whatever asking for, why is she keep asking for social security number or whatever else. So that is a large part of it. But yeah, I enjoy it, quite simply. And I will obviously keep it going, because not only do I enjoy it, whenever I put it onto YouTube, other people enjoy it as well. And there's not very many ways that people can get back at scammers. And it's always a good thing to get scammers to, I might be naive in this again, but to maybe think twice about who they're calling, because one day they might just end up getting somebody like Jim Browning on the end of the phone. And I've so much so that I've heard recently that there's other people who do similar stuff to me, scam baiting. And as soon as they mention the word Jim Browning, quite often the scammer hangs up. And if it's one thing I've learned over the last while, although most people, when they've encountered scams and maybe they have had money stolen from them, it's an incredibly difficult thing to combat. And if there's some little section of the internet somewhere on YouTube that is dedicated to trying to get a little bit of, not revenge on a scammer, but just some payback in a small way against a small number of people, for me, that's a good thing. It just means that they don't always get it their own way. And for a lot of people, including myself, it's kind of satisfying.
Well, there you have it. You can check out Jim's YouTube page at youtube.com/Jim Browning. There you'll find all his content. We also profile Jim as part of our video on fighting robocalls on our YouTube channel. And that channel is at youtube.com/AARP Washington. That's AARP Washington, all one word. And the video is called Turning the Tables on Scammers with Jim Browning. So far, that has nearly 50,000 views and also contains a segment with the founder of the NoMo Robo call blocking service to help you understand how robocall crime works. You can learn about our other podcasts at aarp.org/WA Podcast. That's WA Podcast, all one word. Or you can just search for AARP Washington State Podcast on your podcast app. If you'd like to contact us, you can email us at arpwapodcast@gmail.com. That's AARPWA Podcast, and that's all one word, at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll be notified of new episodes, and it really helps get the word out. As always, thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.